Hello and welcome again to Backpage. I'm Jody C. Today we're visiting with Dayna Hubenthal and Scott Burr, and they are a husband-wife team of brilliant people, which is important because they write fascinating things. And they have written and co-written a book with Brian Hanks called Safety Under Construction. So welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
I read this book yesterday, Getting from Tulsa to Dallas, and here's what I like. I like a book that can take what you would think to be a pretty drab subject and make it fun and interesting, you know, and you did that really well. One of the things I like about both of you is that you make me think, and usually in a different way. So tell me how this came about. Safety Under Construction.
Well, I'll start.
Yep.
I was flying on an airplane, sitting next to a very interesting gentleman named Brian Hanks. And he was telling me about how he worked for Kiewit Corporation. And in his work, he saw that it was very difficult to eliminate accidents, and that people did very strange things. They behaved strangely sometimes. They knew what the right thing to do was, but they didn't always do it. And he was looking for answers. And he had some answers, and he used a lot of best practices, but they couldn't get past a certain point where people were not injured or possibly killed on the job. And every once in a while it just happened. The statistics were too overwhelming. And as I sat and listened to him, he quoted Admiral Rickover, he quoted Mahatma Gandhi. I knew this was a man of great integrity and great substance. And so I became very interested in his project of getting that last 5%. So I started to think about what would it take to accomplish a task of keeping people safe on a construction site. And as he was talking, I started looking at what are the things that are the assumptions. Usually there's some type of assumption behind it. We call it, in our discipline of science, call it psychological inertia. It's a fancy term for assumptions and hidden mindsets. And so I thought about those things, and when I got home, I talked to Dayna, and Dayna got very excited about it as a project also. But we had a big gap of time where we weren't going to work on the book. And so that was kind of the beginning of how this project started.
So
then Brian gets a hold of us. You know, we are calling back and forth and say, yeah, hey, are you still interested in doing this? You know, and stuff like that. Well, our minds are percolating all this time as we focus on other things in the back, you know, all these ideas bubble up. And all of a sudden, one day we start talking and we realized it all boils down to one problem, really, one major problem. Well, actually, there were two problems. People do weird things and no one knows why, and we had to solve for that. And then the other problem is that ever since the slaves, when people used to go capture somebody so they could help them build the pyramids, or even before that, anytime someone builds stuff, it's dangerous. Things fall, they crush people, they get worn out, you know, dehydrated, all these things. And it's always a matter of, well, we want to keep people safe, but we got to get this project done.
Right.
So it's always this major contradiction, and Scott and I found in our discipline, if you can narrow it down to one problem, that you can make it a trade-off or a contradiction. You can say, this is the basic thing. There's no problem you can't solve. You can solve any problem if you can get it to that. So
now, as an engineer, I do have to speak up briefly. So far, that's been true for us. And there's no evidence in the scientific literature that every problem can be solved. It's just that so far, every problem that we've faced, and really, literally, I haven't heard of anyone that hasn't been able to resolve a contradiction that they could define very well and solve it. But I have a little caution there.
yeah, Scott's the engineer, so he's a little bit more grounded and wants to not make sure he always tells the truth. I'm a little bit more, we can do it. So, and there's been a lot of problems we solved where people brought them to us and they said, this is against the laws of physics. You can't solve this because you can't go against the laws of physics. And it's like, well, you're using the wrong physics. Let's just look at it this other way, and boom, we solve it.
Right. Usually those are the easier ones to solve when they're in such a narrow, unless they're doing something like quantum dots or, you know, I mean, so esoteric of a science that you're really captured in. It's usually they just pick the wrong set of physical laws to solve the problem.
So I need to mention also that they have a company called Innovations
Scientific. Yeah.
They solve problems,
Yeah, we solve
you
problems.
know, and they do it well.
So we identify the basic contradiction. It's safety. Everybody thinks that safety gets in the way of production.
Right, and it doesn't.
And it doesn't.
It's the other way around.
It's the other way around.
Yeah.
And every single time you have a safety issue, you have a production issue. If you solve the safety problem, your production will go up.
This was the key breakthrough that I had while I was on the plane, but I didn't quite have the frame to say it. So I had to go back to some of the literature that I've read before. Usually we solve problems by analogy. And so I was comparing the construction industry to manufacturing, which I have a great deal of background in manufacturing. And quality, in the days like the 1970s when Japan had adopted quality and they were taking the VCR market away from us and the motorcycle market and then the automotive market, they were doing that all with quality. At the same time, executives had just got finished saying in the US, they had said that quality interfered with production, that if you wanted to have production go up, you couldn't have it be high quality. Well, actually, what they discovered was that when you identify a quality issue, you have a production problem.
Yeah.
And so all we did was just turn it around a little bit. It's really the same principles that Edward Deming and some of the other greats, Duran in quality, have espoused for many, many years. But the breakthrough is that we sought for safety and applied it. And they do have it's a different kind of environment. It's not really exactly the same as manufacturing.
So there are different problems to solve. And then they have, science has advanced so much and technology's advanced so much. There's just, I mean, really honestly, we could have you loaded your watch, your vest, your shoes, your belt, your glasses, everything as you're walking. Because one of the things somebody told us is they said, okay, you solve all these other problems, so you know, all this stuff happens, someone's still going to trip over their own shoes. Because we say 0 accidents, no accidents.
And we even go farther and say that we want to have the target of 0 harm.
0 harm, even because they say, well, accidents are one thing and incidents are another thing. Like if someone tripped over their own shoelaces, they call that an incident. Well, we say, why stop there? Make it so no one could trip over their own shoelaces. And they say, how are you going to do that? Well, if you have your shoes talking to your belt, talking to your vest, it knows when you're getting tired, you're not lifting up your feet as much. You know, you've mapped the terrain, so you know exactly what the landscape of this whole construction site you're working. You know you're about to go over something that's kind of muddy. You're not lifting up your feet, and you're kind of tired, and so you're kind of off balance already. It's going to send a little warning to you, saying, beep, beep, beep. Hey, you're tired, lift up your feet and straighten up, otherwise you're going to fall. Or maybe even have shoes that balance you or something. I mean,
there's a lot of ways to approach
there's a lot of ways to do it, and some of this is not there yet, but some of this technology is there. It's already there. It's just used in other places, and no one's applied it here. So, I mean, there's a lot of work to do.
Well, so if somebody wanted to put that particular type of technology in their construction business,
Yeah.
the cost of that would that work with the cost? I mean, if you balance out the two, you're better off having it than not having it?
Jump on that
Okay,
one?
go ahead.
Yeah.
So
We get so
this is a
excited.
really good question. And what you want to do is you want to use some very basic, simple principles. In quality, they call it a Pareto chart. And you want to look at the highest cost item first. You wouldn't necessarily go after tripping over your own feet because probably it's not a high payoff item right now. We are saying 0 harm, and so some people want to criticize that thing that's going to be dealt with maybe 10 years out or 15 years out. But you pick the highest items first, where most of your cost is being expended related to safety and production. You identify those and you go after them first. And so a lot of people, when I'll give an example in the quality industry, Timken is a great bearing company. They go on to make it so that the wheels on your vehicle can roll beautifully, right? And those bearings support all the weight. Well, at one point, Timken decided to invest a huge sum of money to make more precise bearings. And they were roundly criticized throughout the industry. All the great executives, even other industry executives, said they're going to die because they're facing, competition from Japan and a number of other people. And so what Timken, their simple response is that we aren't looking at how this investment will pay back. We're not looking for the return on investment. We're looking at the return if we don't do it. What will happen if we don't do it? And we realize that we won't be able to stay in the game unless we do it. Now, of course, Timken's still here, and a lot of those other bearing companies are gone. And so the same thing applies. We believe that using these simple principles, making safety the focal point of a construction company's business will allow them to find those Pareto items, the highest priority things that are generating the most cost, starting with first things first, and start saving money. Every time you have an important safety issue, you have a production problem. And really, if you think about looking at a construction site and how many things are happening all at once, they don't even have a process as defined by a manufacturing engineer.
Yeah.
And so having things be more systematic, be more science-oriented, being more process-oriented, these are all things that are coming soon to a construction industry company near you, right?
Yeah, it's all going to happen in the future. And one of the things is there was a big crane accident. They called it Big Blue, and it's a real famous crane accident. And they were really under pressure, and they really had to hurry and get this done. And so they decided to make this pick, which is lifting up this great big load of steel and raising it up.
And it was very windy.
And it was very windy. And the crane operator who normally did it said, I'm not going to do it. That's too dangerous. And so he said, I'm going home. And a bunch of iron workers walked off the site in protest because they were going to do it anyway.
That's a huge statement.
Yeah, I mean, just for them to do that, they wouldn't do it. But some other supervisor, he got on, he says, I know how to operate cranes. He did the pick, the crane broke, killed 3 people. Okay, so they would have gotten a penalty if they hadn't, achieved some milestone or something like that. But now, let's say just purely monetary, purely monetary. Forget the absolute devastation of 3 people who aren't going to have their families come home for them anymore. But each of the families got like $175 million. The survivors, that was I think they got $90 million from the company, and then they got a civil lawsuit, which was even way more than that. And then they ended up, the project was 2 years behind schedule, and they had to pay all these penalties and fines. And I mean, wow, if you think about what could happen, investing, and that's one of the things about construction, it doesn't invest in itself. There's no company that we could find that had R&D budgets, not one. Now,
Except
Bechtel?
Bechtel.
Bechtel had some. But if you go to Apple, and I mean, you look up Apple and you say Apple R&D, oh my gosh, there's like 200 pages.
Thousands of hits on Apple R&D.
Why
You do
doesn't the
construction industry R&D?
One, Bechtel.
One hit.
And it wasn't a massive thing. So, I mean, they can afford some of this. And hey, let's bring the government in. The government will want to help with this. And let's bring the labor unions in. And let's bring, professional organizations. All these people have something to gain if this synergy of getting this towards zero harm.
But don't you run into a lot of, it seems to me that, people hate OSHA and people hate, but the way to change that is to talk money with them.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
we lose more money if we have a big incident than we would if we just ran safely.
Right. And we just read a study by somebody at, I can't remember, Duke University, I think, who did a study, and they did 600 companies. They just did surprise inspections, and they found out the companies that were surprise inspection made more money. Not that they paid less in fines and stuff, which they did also, but they actually were more productive than the companies that they didn't inspect. So they did this big study about, okay, we have this group of, go inspect some of them, and then making those safety changes did indeed make them more profitable.
Yeah.
And really, if you think about it, having an antagonistic relationship with, some type of regulation agency, they just really haven't accepted the fact that people need to be safe.
Yeah.
And I did have a private conversation. I was at a party, and a person sitting next to me right during the middle of when we were getting close to, concluding the first round of writing on the book. And this gentleman, he ran a construction company. And so I was talking to him a little bit, and he said, oh yeah, I hate OSHA. They charged me $10,000 for something, and I guess he had some rebar that was uncapped. This is a way that a person can impale themselves if they do trip on their own feet.
Right.
And he felt that it was quite unjust.
You are supposed to cap those, aren't you?
That's correct.
That's right.
Getting
He
impaled.
just missed one.
Yeah,
or
getting
two.
impaled is not a really good thing on a construction site. It's just.
Yeah.
But the mentality that he expressed was really interesting to me, and so I kept probing him, and he's very, he was adamant that they were just really jerks. And so in the writing of the book, we actually use some of this kind of language, where we reflect back the kind of people who represent that more extreme view. We talk like that so that they kind of get the idea of where they're at on the scale of how they relate to this agency. And if you really want to have a great relationship with an agency like that, you've got to be proactive. You have to take the lead. If this gentleman took the lead and treated every safety issue as a production issue, his company would make more money. And so I actually told him that. I told him, I said, you know what, really, you're hurting yourself. I said, you don't seem like the kind of guy that leaves money on the table, but I just see lots of money on the table. And he took a little offense to that until I told him, I said, everywhere you have a safety problem, you're losing money. But all you have to do is solve the problems, and then you won't have the safety issue or the production issue. He says, well, what's wrong with you? Get that damn book out. Hard-headed one way, hard-headed the other.
Yeah. So let me tell people this. If you're just tuning in, I'm Jody C., and this is Backpage, and we're visiting with Dayna Hubenthal and Scott Burr about their new book, Safety Under Construction, which they wrote in conjunction with Brian Hanks. Where is he?
He's in Alaska right now on a construction site.
Okay.
He's the safety manager.
Okay. Hey, Brian. So what do you want to have happen with this book? What do you want?
We have a vision that, we have a number of different objectives for the book, for at least for Dayna and I. And three of us together, Brian, Dayna and I, we want to see zero harm on a work site. There's no reason that companies couldn't pursue making more money and making safety the focal point of their business. That's what we want to see. And we want to do that in such a way so that it causes more jobs to be created. When manufacturing adopted quality, the whole goal was to make things so efficient that you needed less people. Well, the reason that we're using innovation and process orientation, you need to have a good process so that people will be safe, but you also need to have innovation to create new levels of opportunity.
And value.
And value. And so if you can have a single person creating multiple forms of value that can create new types of revenue streams, now that's a whole different proposition. You want to have more people, not less. And so part of our objective, Dayna and I, as Innovation Scientific, we really want to see more jobs created also. We want people safe on the job, and we're looking for that, resolving every contradiction related to that in this industry.
Because what happened in manufacturing is as quality got more adopted, all the C's went over, the jobs, they didn't need as many people. And we want to see safety and quality built in, with profits and schedule, secondary, important considerations and meaningful work for all. That's kind of like a little thing that we put in the book. Because, and that's why we wrote the first book on this. We're going to write a management book and one for engineers. But the first book is for the frontline supervisors and the actual craft workers. Because, hey, if you don't get involved in this, then you're going to be out of a job, because the way that business knows how to do this is, whoa, good. Now we got our processes down and we can do it better. We don't need people.
Yeah, we're going to automate. We're going to get rid of people. We'll be more efficient, and they won't be thinking along this newer line that we're
we want. People need to work. We need more jobs in the United States. And the construction industry is a good, it's a good job set. And so we want people to keep jobs, but they have to do it differently. Construction workers have to change their minds. So,
well, I had a number of clients who were construction guys, and that was a banged up bunch of guys.
Yes.
And something was always happening, like a wall falling on them, or a come along would snap and conk, and but there was a certain bravado in it also.
We addressed that.
Okay, so talk about that.
Okay, so one of the things we found, it's so interesting because this is such an entrenched.
Let me add this: that they were all great guys.
Oh, yeah.
But
absolutely.
There was something about
Yeah, we're the action arm. We go get things done. We're tough. We can handle it if we smack our fingers, or glass falls in our eyes. That's all right. I just shoved it off and kept working. Because we had this thing. That's part of the. Construction is manly, and that's part of it. And so you have to address that because that, I'm not saying get rid of the attitude, but you have to only apply that attitude when it's not involved in safety.
Yeah.
And so one part of the book, part 3, is one of the funnest parts of it for me, is people do weird things. And it's all the reason people do weird things. And there's a reason behind every single weird thing people do. And it's
bravado has a huge and important role.
Right.
Because think about it. Here you are, the current state of the industry, how they do it. They have dangerous things passing overhead, trucks, heavy equipment,
Right.
things with hydraulics that can generate huge amounts of force. And here you've got this person in the center of
frail.
all that, pretty frail comparison. And that person is subject to an accident. So you have to kind of have almost an attitude to match that, right? You have to be able to be in that moment and make some really hard decisions. So there's no process, right? We were saying that the process isn't really clear. They have to make their decisions on the fly. Some of the most dangerous decisions they make are right when things are passing overhead, right when you're at that critical moment. And it takes a certain kind of decisive, extraordinary personality. I mean, construction people have had that for 10,000 years, right? Since the pyramids. And so you have to really realize who these people are.
they're good.
They're good at what they do. What we're suggesting is not to change who they are, but to take those skills and bring them back to the top level of performance. Because this is the same way they've done it for 10,000 years, literally,
So-
in
so-
some cases. So
So there's a chapter in there called split-second decision making. This is how it currently is done. If you look at it from a slightly different point of view, wow, it's going to be so much better. And that's because we went and studied other industries. What do air traffic controllers do? What do SWAT team people do? What are all these people do best practices? Can that be applied to construction? Yes, in this ways. All of a sudden, there's a path to make better split-second decisions. Now, one of the reasons iron workers, who are the daredevils of the sky,
Right.
they're the ones who built our skyscrapers. You know, they've been places no one else in the nation has gone. They went there first.
Right.
And you know, they're a proud lot, and they fall to their death all the time.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay. And falling accidents is the number one way people get killed on construction sites. So we said,
and
okay.
iron workers have a higher percentage than other types of construction workers in terms of deaths.
So we said, okay, so what's happening? And then we said, well, I'll bet it's the new people. Well, no, actually, the new people hardly ever fall. They almost never. Oh, well, it must be the older ones who are kind of lost their edge and are a little stiffer and stuff. No, it's not them. It's the people at their peak, the very best of the job. They're the ones
Really?
who fall.
They just got blasé about it,
Well,
or what?
that's what we said. Well, what in the heck is happening? So we started doing research, and there's all
We have
these
an
different
inventive
ways.
process that we do to
Yeah.
try to enter the mindset of a person who's really talented, that is a great match, or maybe even possibly a little cocky. And that's what we discovered.
It's complacency. They think, wow, I know this job is important, and I'm 90 feet up, or 90 stories up, and I'm walking on this narrow beam, and I should be tied off, but all I'm going to do is go over here, pick up this darn thing, and get back.
Yeah.
And then I don't want to have to retie off and everything. And they think the job they're about to do is way below their skill level. And then
Maybe they're thinking about home.
maybe they're thinking about lunch, maybe whatever, but it's complacency. So then we said, okay, so what do you do with complacency? And that's all in part 3. People do weird things. There's all these wonderful discoveries we made about like the human brain and
Learn
people's-
how do you create complacency? That's one of the questions we ask, because are there steps? Is there a process? Because we believe everything has an underlying process. And if you can identify that process, then you know how to work with it. Either break it, stop it, enhance it, whatever it is. In case of complacency, you'd like to interrupt it before it becomes dangerous. And so we did research, looked at other industries, what they do about complacency. We actually found some really interesting information in the medical industry. Doctors can't become complacent during surgery. We found this nice little article that explained
exactly
some
what's
things that were-
happened. and-
Yeah, and it was a very close match to what we had. Our inventive process said this is what would have to happen. And we like their language so much better, we use them as the source for the book instead of our own work.
But it's a fun thing to discover, why all these strange, weird accidents. And then Brian got really excited because he's like, oh my gosh, now we can do something about these things. Because he says the worst thing in the world is when you have this 20-year veteran, they've been doing this job, they know it, they've gone through all the training, they know they're the safety leader for their little group, and then they turn around and instead of unplugging the saw, they try to change the blade with the saw plugged in. because they just like, oh, I'm in a hurry, I'll be really careful, and they do it. And then you say, why did you do that? You know better. I don't know.
People
a lot
can't
of people,
explain it,
they
but
can't
there is a
explain.
reason.
There is a reason.
Yeah.
It's because when your brain has two things, like two tensions, like
Get it done fast.
I gotta get it done
safe.
fast. Everybody else on the team is waiting for me. I gotta get this thing done. I'm supposed to be safe. I gotta be safe. Oh, look, that guy's looking at his watch again. Your brain can only hold that tension for 20 seconds. If it's
Unless you're trained.
Unless you're trained to hold it for longer, which like air traffic controllers train for that and stuff. But most people, the average person, can only hold that high degree of tension for 20 seconds, and then the brain does one of three things. It makes you think of something else so that you can't think of it. So then you just go off and, you start
Subconsciously
changing it.
choose.
Yeah. Or it says, it makes it rational. There's one part of your brain that says, oh, you don't really need to be that safe. Or it may choose you don't really need to be, that deadline's not that important, but it's a 50-50 choice. It'll choose one of them for you and make you feel really good about it. And then the other one I can't remember right this second, but it
And
has
this is
to.
a science that's behind the psychology of this. So we've brought some of these really great tools in to help people understand what's actually happening, because you talk to a guy for 30 years who's been a carpenter and then does something like this and they're mystified. I don't know why I did that.
Yeah.
And they're a great employee.
And
So-
they're like, how could I have done that?
Yeah,
Right.
how could I
Yeah.
have done
So
that?
this is why we think that the fundamental contradiction that we identify in the book, safe versus fast, is very damaging. In fact, this contributes probably significantly. That mindset alone contributes to accidents in a huge way, because you've got people in this, the scientific term is called cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Lovely term. But basically, you're in tension with yourself and you're trying to pick a decision. Which one?
So this book is called Safety Under Construction, and it's actually very interesting. And it's almost as interesting as these two people right here. Where can people get this if they want to learn about safety in construction?
It's so we're also publishers, so they can come to our website, Kohopono, and you'll get it at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and in 55 countries or 57 countries around the world. You can walk into any bookstore and say, I want to order it. So
Right. We're distributed by Ingram.
Ingram, so
Okay.
same way as your book, actually, Jody.
Yeah. So we've been visiting with Scott Burr and Dayna Hubenthal about their book, Safety Under Construction, which I recommend if you want to know that you can have both safety and productivity. This is the way to learn about it. This is back page. Join us again next time as we take another peek at the back page. And remember, we're all in this together. More of the same than different. Do your best. These people always do. Thanks so much.